So welcome to Triptych, the Carleton Research Practice of Teaching Collaborative. My name is Federica Goffi. I'm a professor of architecture here at the school. And together with a group of PhD students, we will be conducting an interview today with Dr. Jorge Figueira, Dr. Rui Lobo, and Dr. Nuno Grande, who coordinate respectively the PhD program in Cultural Studies and Architecture, the PhD program in Theory and History of Architecture and Urbanism, and the PhD program in Urban Culture and Design at the Universidade de Coimbra in Portugal. And as I said, the interview is conducted by a group of PhD students. We have Bruno Silvestre, Shanne Stines, Ashleigh Abraham, and two post-professional master students, Emiliano Ruidiaz and Leah Snyder, and myself. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
I guess we would like to start, with perhaps outlining a little bit your respective role in the PhD programs that you coordinate, and also if you can share with us some of the history of how the program became established, how you then created these three different areas of research, and how you each individually contributed to shaping those areas.
Okay, I can start as the coordinator of the course. Well, the program started 15 years ago with Professor Mario Kruger, who was our first full professor in our school. And in the beginning, it was a 2 years program. So there were like 2 or 3 editions that had these 2 years of classes where the students would...
it was 3 semesters.
Three semesters. And then we decided to change it into an annual program. And it's been like that for the last 12 years, more or less. And so far we have already, I think, 24 to 25 theses that were presented and defended and approved. So it's more or less 2 a year. So we have 2 PhD students that finish their thesis and defend it every 2 per year, more or less. It's been a tutorial program mostly, so we don't have research projects going on. So it's mostly a relationship between a tutor, a supervisor, and the student after they finish their curricular year, which is the first year. And then they have normally 2 years more to finish their thesis. So students are expected to accomplish their PhD in 3 years, 1 curricular year and two research years with their supervisor support. Recently, we now have an official and approved research center in our department. And now the students are starting to apply or to have a relationship between their research and what the research center is developing as research projects. So, but this is quite recent. So for the last, let's say, 12 years, students have been researching on their own themes proposed by their supervisors, which normally have research interests and are related with other research centers. But mostly, this is, as I said, a tutorial program. So the relationship is mostly between the supervisor and the PhD student. I don't know if I answered all that you wanted to know, but it's mostly like this.
Yeah, and I guess, I don't know if you or anyone else would like to answer that, but we were wondering also about the 3 different areas. Because you have
Oh, yes. Yes. Maybe Rui, or Jorge, can you develop a little bit on that?
No, I can speak a little bit on my proposal that I think I started I think 5 years ago. And the thing is, as you know, we have a visiting professor every year that will give us a theme, a topic of relevance within this broad scope of cultural studies and architecture that I define as something that interconnects and clashes architecture with other fields of knowledge, with other disciplines, as post-colonialism or feminism or postmodernism. So we're dealing with this intersection between also the arts and sociology and psychoanalysis and architecture. But of course, also with the history of modern movement, the avant-gardes, the Team 10 period, the Venturi Dennis Scott Brown journey. So we're really aiming to bring on what is within the architectural field, but also another disciplines. I think that the more celebrated moment was when we had Anthony Vidler in our school, in our class, and we did this work on the architectural uncanny. So somehow trying to manage the imbalance between the rationality and the irrationality, the Freud themes of the sublime, etc. So this is a little bit the frame where our course is put forward, and we are trying to bring along all the disciplines and all the ideas outside of the architectural field.
That's a fascinating structure.
Okay. Yes, I probably add also that, yes, we have this visiting professor is one for each of the seminars. So we have 3 each year. So it gives a very dynamic fall period, fall semester, which we're crossing now today. We already had 2 of them. We'll have another one in 2 weeks' time. And in interior history of architecture, of course, is a very broad area, and it's a kind of umbrella where the research interests of the professors that we have a series. I'm the coordinator, but I have each year another 5 colleagues of mine of the department, which some of them rotate sometimes. So and they bring their interests, their research interests, and also the invited professor brings his topic, which is also matter of discussion of the other curricular unit that is missing, which is methodologies of architecture, which is our colleague Gonçalo Canto Muniz in the first semester, and this becomes project thesis in the second semester. So these inputs by the visiting professors are also useful for these 2 curricular units that are very important.
Thank you. This perhaps...
and in my case, the third seminar, thematic seminar, which is Urban Culture and Design, we try to understand how some cultural periods created specific urban design. So how culture influences policies and urban planning. And to add to what Jorge has said, we have been having some very interesting visiting professors that brings different perspectives on this relation between architectural culture, urban culture, and design. For example, we had Jean-Louis Cohen that brought, of course, his studies on relation between the West and Soviet Union period, the avant-garde period, or Tom Avermaet, for example, that brought the thematics of commons and how we deal today with communities and public space. So it's, as you see, it's a very wide, open perspective on history, theory, urban design, and these are all mandatory seminars. So the students have to accomplish every curricular year all the seminars by delivering their own paperwork.
That's fascinating. It's really a unique element of the program. I can't recall any other program, and we've done maybe over the last 10 years about 30 interviews, and I don't recall one that was quite set up with this notion of the visiting professor. So it's quite unique. And I guess this goes to my next question, where I was going to ask you about the relations to other programs in Europe in terms of, I guess, your own uniqueness in how you set up the program, or perhaps some of the areas of research that you cover, and even in terms of methodologies, if we compare this with other programs in history and theory, or programs in architecture by design or by practice, how do you work with your students?
Well, Our PhD course is mostly a culturalist course, which means that it's mostly based on a personal research by the student himself with the support of the supervisor. So as I said in the beginning, we are not really related with any research by design project, even if design could be one of the themes that the student chooses. But so far, we don't have a direct relationship with other with practical or ongoing research projects developed in research centers. And this, I think, it's different from what happens in other courses. But of course, that doesn't mean that we are not seeking for this relationship. As I said, our research center is quite recent. So we are now starting some relationships with research by design projects. So we might get a little bit closer to other models that exist in Europe. But so far, it's, as I said, mostly based on the relationship between the tutor and the student. I don't know if my colleagues would like to add something about.
I want to add a little bit on that Nuno said. You know that me and Nuno, not Rui, we did graduate in a Porto school, so we know everything there is to know about practice. We're really heavy practitioners. So the thing is that we really, from our student years, wanted to grow knowledge and to develop our sensibility within the theoretical and historical frame. So, and this is, I think, what is still missing in our community, critical thinking, the theory, the ideas, the imagination through ideas, the impact of ideas. That is what I think is still missing in our community. And I think that our aim is to do that without being too much intellectual or being too much philosophical about that. We're trying to have this balance between the story of ideas and the importance of theory within the frame of our architectural sensibilities, that is designing ideas and going through ideas. So I'm not that keen or not that interested in doing PhD in the realm of practice or research by design. It's not really my sensibility. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, but I could add perhaps that this theme of research by design. I do this sometimes in the area of theory and history or history of architecture to use design to research in history of architecture. It's something that I've been supervising for some time. I did a research project on that theme also. So this is a thing that I foster in my classes if the students want to take on. But of course, Nuno mentioned the research center, but we are all also researchers at the Center of Social Studies, which is also an important input for the students. They can associate themselves also with the center if they want. Of course, because it's an excellent grade research center, and we're starting now the architecture research center, which still is classified as good. It is a starting point, so we have to help to build this new research center. Also, is an important task for the next years.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, that was very helpful. And I asked that question about whether it's history and theory, criticism, or by design and practice, precisely because there is such an array of approaches in architecture research internationally, and it's interesting to see how each program situates itself uniquely. So thank you for the answers.
Yes, perhaps I would like to add just that we don't really have kind of a curricular of content to be given to the students. So there is no fixed set of classes. So this is quite dynamic in this sense.
Thank you.
Well, we have a schedule of classes by seminars, but of course the students are free to research on different things.
And the professors.
and they can choose any professor at the school to be one of their supervisors or co-supervisors.
Mm-hmm. And can they take the seminars in each of the? Do they have to take the seminar in their own, I guess, area of studies, or do they have access to the other seminars as well?
Well, we have, as I said, 3 mandatory thematic seminars. Then that one on methodologies, and one which helps them to make their thesis project that will be presented by the end of
the second semester.
Yeah, by the end of the curricular year. But these 3 seminars, as you might understand through their titles, are very open field they offer an open field of research, so they can always feed their own interests and the professor's interest in one of those seminars. So I think it's even if they are mandatory, they're a kind of open field of interests.
So, for instance, in my seminar, we have like 3 seminars by 3 professors, in total of 6 during the year. And so in each semester, the students choose one of the themes to deal with in a presentation and a work report. So they don't have to respond to all the themes of all the thematic suggestions of the professors. They choose one each semester from my seminar.
Thank you for clarifying that. Thanks. I guess Bruno.
Yes, it was nice to see you 3 on the screen.
Hello.
And quite a little bit strange for me. We will edit this bit out of the recording. Well, I think Jorge has already mentioned the idea of interdisciplinarity. So I'm going to rephrase that question of interdisciplinarity and ask how the 3 different strands of the PhD program, do they actually interact? Do they cross? Is there a cross-pollination between these 3 programs that would contribute to the students' research, or are they in kind of independent lines?
No, of course they have crossed thematics, because they all have culture, city, architecture in their titles. The way we look at those different fields that are related to architecture depends, of course, on our own research path, which means me, George, and Rui, were all trained in the same way, because me and George came from Porto. Rui was training in Coimbra, but there was an affinity between teachers and themes and methods that somehow shaped our own path. So in a way, we address similar things, but in my case, through the perspective of the urban design, Rui through history mostly, and George through theory. So that would be the specific way of looking at this triangle between culture, city, and architecture.
Okay. No, Bruno, it's complementary. It's kind of we're know each other for a long time now, almost 100 years, and so we know how each other speak and thinks, and we'll have some common ground. Some really radical differences in our points of view. So I think it's good for the students to know that they are in the same boat, but it's a strange boat.
And just following up to the next question, which with the pace of this conversation, I'm also rephrasing. So 3 visiting professors every year sort of rejuvenate and refresh the agenda of the programs. And how does that connect or relate to the research interests that the students bring to the table? So the original question was, to what extent the contribution of Portuguese architectural culture in the last 50 years has contributed to the research interests and agendas that the students bring to the table. So how does that relate, what the students want to research and what the visiting professors bring to the discussion?
but we're trying, Bruno, we're trying to bring along different knots, different horizons. We're trying to go within our own tradition and Portuguese architectural tradition, and to listen to what has not already been listened. At the same time, we're expanding the field, and of course we feel deeply European. We feel deeply European. That has to do with our political colonial history. Also, we have a lot of Brazilian students, for instance. So we're always trying to go within our own tradition and to have this dialogue with our Brazilian friends, but also going through the art of Europe, to the art of avant-garde European history, and also to the Americas, and also to the United States, to Canada, to what is ruling the world right now. So I think it's trying to connect the dots, and hopefully the students are able to have this kind of flexibility that we propose.
Yes, and we try to kind of vary the profile of the personalities that we invite. For instance, I have invited alternatively architects that produce architecture but also write. I have invited architectural historians, art historians, and so Portuguese and international. So we have this kind of continuous variation, and this is because, of course, the students of the other years are invited to come to attend the conference, which is open to the school, but then we have a seminar with invited guests, and this is open to the PhD students of the year that's going on, but we also invite the other PhD students that are researching and producing their thesis. So this, I think, is important, so they can have in a period of 3-4 years, which they do the thesis, or 5, they can attend like 5 versus 3 plus 5 times 3, so 15 seminars like this in the course of realizing a PhD thesis.
Well, but in terms of research thematics, we always ask the students when they apply, do not bring a prefab research program or research project if you don't have it already, because some students might have already a scholarship when they apply for a specific purpose. But the normal, well, let's say the great number of students that apply, they don't bring a prefab research in their mind. We ask them to open their mind by listening to the professors. The themes that we propose for each semester paper they have to deliver are also related with their own perspective on the themes that the invited teacher brings. So in a way, the papers they have to do every semester are somehow rehearsals or trainings for what they will write afterwards in their thesis. They can include part of these papers that they do for our seminars in their future thesis, or they just can leave in another direction. So it depends on the way the student wants to relate with the course. I don't know if we were clear about this.
Just to add a little bit, as my colleagues Rui and Nuno were saying, they're really case by case kind of a methodology, because they bring different ideas. Sometimes, very rarely, they have already a thesis, a proposal that we can accept or not. Then many times they have really any idea, so they just have a feeling, and our function is to really try to to push them forward and to bring some questions that they might think are interesting. And in the other cases, I think the more more normal cases are the people that have an idea and have a proposal, but are needing support to develop this idea.
Thank you. My next question sounds like the last question, could be a closing question, but it sort of comes from me as someone who studied there. And I know that you have been active participants in the school since its inception in the late 1980s. At least I remember the three of you since day one I joined the school. So how do you describe the trajectory that the school has followed and how the school has affirmed itself in the wider context of architectural education, not only in Portugal, but more broadly in the European context?
Well, I can start with one or two ideas. As you know, Bruno, very well, and I want to say to all this beautiful group, our school was the first that started within the university. The other two schools were developments of the Beaux-Arts of Lisbon and the Beaux-Arts of Porto. So our school was the first that grew within the university. And it was like a meeting point between the Lisbon sensibility and professors from Lisbon, and then the Porto school that was, well, more present even than the Lisbon school. So we have this, we are a kind of a Frankenstein kind of son of these two schools.
And inside the oldest university of Portugal.
Inside the oldest university of Portugal. And I'm really very proud of the first 20 years. I'm not so sure of the last 20 years, but that I think we can say about everything in the world right now. Because really, in the first 20 years, in the 90s, at the beginning of the century, we really move along with this idea that to create a school of architecture that moved along theory and history and design and the mystery of ideas. And somehow, I think we managed to create a space that it's very rare and singular in our country. Out of the legend kind of being supported by Pritzker's Prize or by being the capital of the empire in Lisbon. So we were very free. And we still are a little free, a little bit older now. But I think that it's all open for the future of our school. And of course, we are very happy, Bruno, that you're there doing this beautiful work with these beautiful people, and hope to see you back in the department with Federica as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Yes, I perhaps could add that we're talking about the master course in a sense that the school the master course is always, in spite of what Jorge said of this crossing of these three areas of design, history, and theory. The formation, the training is centered in design and design studio. So design studio is central every year, but also there is an important contribution of theory and history and other subjects. And we had, in fact, we had an element when it was pre-Bologna that was a kind of the prova final, which was a theoretical work with which the students should finish their licentiature, and then this became the master thesis. But now the master theses are focused on design works, but nevertheless there is a kind of memory of the work, a written memory, a written report, and still there is an important contribution of theory and design, and so in the master course.
Well, I could add also that in our master design studios, we try to get a realistic approach to what is happening in Portugal, and mostly in different cities, small size, medium sized cities. We normally search for problems that mayors or aldermen are looking to solve, and we try to add them, to help them to think through our students' proposals, to think about some problem. So in a way, we always try that the school or the academia could to be related with real problems, real situations, because those are the things that these students will find when they become professionals. So I think this is the main difference with the PhD course, because we in the PhD course, as George said, we are more free. We're not so attached to this idea that we are accomplishing a program that was given by some real mayor, some real aspect that a mayor or an alderman has asked us to help them solve. So I think it's interesting to say, but the PhD is where they can really exercise their freedom of writing and thinking.
Thank you.
No, but one more thing, and I would like to go back to what Nuno was saying, because that is, I think, the part that is more interesting of our teaching tradition, which is this kind of realism and this kind of going through the small scales and small places and do pragmatic work by drawing, by discussing, by creating solutions, and being very totally pragmatic on this kind of approach. So I think we can speak of the best of two worlds in this radical pragmatism, as if we were in the studio, if the students were in the studio in real time, and this kind of real openness to the discussion in theoretical terms.
Well, I normally say to my students, be prepared. You're going to design in ugly spaces. So we never create this idyllic place for the student to design their beautiful project. We always say, be prepared, because the real world outside will need your design, because you are going to deal with things which are unfinished, ugly, or in terms of aesthetics. But that's also the big challenge of contemporary architecture, is to compromise with other things that we may not consider architecture, but they are part of architectural life and city's life. So as George said, it's a realistic approach that I think prepares the students to understand better what is around them. We tend to be very suspicious of these courses that always give a kind of idyllic idea that the architect will be a superhero that will solve all the problems in a certain place. I think the idea of dialoguing and compromising with the reality is something that we emphasize a lot.
Well, just a little footnote. I'm not glad to say that we are only following our master Álvaro Sisa's example, because we're dealing with realism and with really trying to get to the art of the problems of the small mid towns and the territory and the places that are ugly or worse, but at the same time to have an idealism, to create a space that is a space of discussion that goes through the heart of Europe, or even to the other continents. And that was what precisely Sisa did in his 70 years of work, to be a realist, to be a pragmatist, and also to be an idealist. And there are plenty of ideas flowing around Sisa's. So I'm not happy to say we're just following the master.
Yeah, and I think Leah Snyder, who's a professional master student, has the next few questions.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the
Hello.
Thank you for the conversation thus far. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So my question is, as a school of architecture in a country with a rich history of modernist architects, like Sisa, who you just mentioned, how does or does not the modernist legacy factor into current student work? has there been any aesthetic break in tradition and or new approaches to materiality in architectural design? Thank you.
Well, I might start. I'm not really sure that Cesar is a modern architect. That's the first issue. I think Cesar's methodology of designing, as George was saying, including more than excluding, it's a very postmodern approach. And if in 1980 Paolo Portuguesi was talking about the presence of the past, I think for Cesar, as for many of his disciples, mostly Sotomayor, modernism is already the past. So they can use it as any postmodern architect would use classicism. And so I think it's a very interesting way of looking at the recent past, and of course using some of the modernist approach, as George was saying, the idyllic idea that we can solve problems, but even when we sometimes cannot. But I wouldn't frame Cesar in a modernist tradition. I think he loves modernism, he understands modernism, but he uses it as another language that is there to be used. Maybe George is not totally in.
No. I think the question was not about Cesar. I think, well, let's move on, and I want to answer your question by saying, I think that something that defines our culture is that we wanted to be modern. We wanted to be modernist back in the day, back when we were under a dictatorship, and in Estado Novo, we were looking with envy to our brothers, friends in Brazil doing this incredible modernist architecture. So we grew up on this aspiration to be modern. And finally, when we were able to be modern, postmodern happened, and the democracy happened, and the revolution happened in Portugal. So the thing is, we're going through these oscillations that being modern is important and then is not really important. And I think now we're really, I did an exhibition on Portuguese architecture, and last period I call it Wi-Fi. So I think we're going to the Wi-Fi period, which is the space where modernism is integrated in the Wi-Fi spaces. So, of course, we have a very dear and very proximity with the modernist ideas and challenges, because we really wanted to be modern at a time where it was very difficult to be modern in Portugal. So it's like the forbidden fruit that we never tasted.
I don't know if Rui wants to say something, because he's giving a class which is called History of Portuguese Architecture. So maybe, well, starting from an ancient period.
Well,
maybe...
in fact, I end in the late 18th century, because there is another curricular unit. This is in the master course. There is one curricular unit of 20th century Portuguese architecture, which is not given by me. It's by Nuno Correia.
Yeah, but and you speak a little bit about the Portuguese tradition of looking at
well, it is a tradition of constant simplification, of constant adaptation of international models to the local realities and local constraints, both sociological, both material. So this is you can track this down from the 12th century. So this is happening all the time in cycles and counter cycles, and it's also an alternation between a more rhetoric approach and a more plain approach in the using the term of George Kubler of the Portuguese plain architecture. So you have always this oscillation, as George puts it, and well, I think this could happen in other architectures across the world, but here there is at least a record of 800 years of this happening.
Thank you for that. My next question is, what is the legacy of the 1969 Barreto Urban Renewal Study on current approaches to architectural interventions in city planning? What are the critiques of that area, and are there new approaches to urbanism in Portugal? Thank you.
When you say 1969, are you referring to any specific moment? Or
it's the Barreto Urban Study.
Barreto.
The Barreto. Okay, yes. Okay. Well, I can try to answer, but my friends are professors of theory and history, so I can just give my...
That is an urbanism question, Nuno.
Okay.
So we're starting to frame things.
Well, it's interesting because Tavora started his career by looking at modernism and functionalistic planning, and Le Corbusier with a great admiration. And I think not only the inquest to the popular architecture in the late 50s, but also his experience in Porto in this old urban fabric with all the social problems that he found there, and he found really serious problems. One family living in one room, and you might know these drawings that he did, incredible drawings about the densification of these poor neighborhoods. He started to understand that that architecture has to be related with life, has to be related with the social realm, has to be related with the social needs. And so suddenly, I'm not saying that he became an ethnographer or a sociologist, but in a way he started integrating all these other readings coming from other disciplines into his own practice and his own research. So I think Barreto had it was very important, for example, to all the participatorial process that started in the early 1970s, with the Beaux-Arts students being involved with the research of these poor, by making analysis of these poor neighborhoods. And of course, that also influenced the way then, after the revolution, the ASAU program, the participatorial program happened. And it was one of the most important moments of the Portuguese, or the relationship between the Portuguese architects and the revolution. So I think 1969 and the Barreto studies were quite important. I would say for urban renewal mostly. The idea that you can use the existing city to solve the problems of a whole city. You don't have to invent anything new.
I think it's important to add that the Barreto, it was not done according to Tavares, to this study. He made the proposal, the study, but then the authorities just dismissed him and did another thing, did a different thing. Nevertheless, it was a very important study because he focused on the need of keeping the inhabitants inside the city. Of course, he had to. The study proposed the relocation of some of them because of the density of the density, the population density was very high, so some of the people should leave. But nevertheless, the buildings would keep about 70% of their inhabitants, and this, of course, was a key motto for the ASAU project in Oporto, which was to keep the communities in the center of the city. So this is a very important approach. And of course, one thing that Tavora proposed in the Barreto study is that he wanted to keep the construction techniques and methods inside the buildings. And of course, the authorities, they just dismissed him and substitute everything with concrete inside. So they substitute the wood beam techniques and other construction techniques, and so they just did another thing. Then Tavora, of course, applied this knowledge to Guimarães, and he is a very practical guy, and he always used used a practical case to inform the other cases. So in Guimarães, what he did, he was recovered one famous house, the Rua Nova, and this served as kind of a model, not in the design, but is in the procedure for the local cabinet to accompany the rehabilitations of the local land owners in Guimarães. And of course, he then developed the public space design for a few plazas, and this became really a case study in Portugal, is the recovery of the historical center of Guimarães, where Távora had a very important role, because he did not focus only in the center of the city. He also made a proposal for the plan of Guimarães that was then developed by Nuno Portas. So this idea that to resolve the problems of the inner city, you have to think also about the city as a whole. So as Nuno Portas put it, one center in the periphery, one foot in the center and the other foot in the periphery. And this was a kind of very successful case study in the 1980s and 1990s, which Távora was very important. And of course, Távora was also a teacher at our school. So he's a very important figure in Oporto, but also in Coimbra.
Thank you.
And I know this because I have a PhD student that's doing a PhD on the urban project by Fernando Távora. This idea that Fernando Távora, he's normally recognized by his architecture, by this regional criticism, but I wanted, as a Brazilian student, in fact, I wanted her to explore the idea of the urban project in Fernando Távora, which changed along his period, but he's a modern by training. He never stops being a modernist, but he also is ahead of his time.
Well, that would be at the beginning of a discussion, but
yes, I can invite you. I can suggest your name for the jury.
Do a seminar on that. But what Nuno and Rui was saying, by answering your question, means the origins of renewal or urban rehabilitation, and also the heritage rehabilitation, which is now central to the Portuguese experience. So this is that work in Barredo is really the setting stone of the rehabilitation as the center of the Portuguese experience. Yeah. Because everything is old and everything is in ruins.
Hi, hello. My name is Emiliano Ruidiaz. I am a MIS student here at Carleton. My question is for Nuno Grande. In the exhibition Álvaro Siza in Discipline, which you created together with Carlos Muro at the Serralves Museum of Contemporary Art in Porto, mentions Siza conceptual toolbox. And at the School of Architecture in Coimbra, do students try to develop their own conceptual toolbox? And if so, what is the knowledge and what are some of the values students are expected to learn?
Well, that's a very good question. I keep saying normally that what I appreciate in Siza is not the style, it's the method. Actually, me and Jorge, we were training in the Porto School, and what I took from this experience is the method, not the style. I don't think copying or reproducing the Porto School as a style has any sense. I think what is interesting on Siza and Távora, and even on Souto de Moura, is this idea that we have to learn from the site, learn from the client, learn from the possible materials that we can use according to the budget we have. So this idea of realism, idyllic realism, as George put it. So I think the toolbox that we try to give our students is exactly that. So think about a solution for this problem, but think how methodology, in terms of method, how can you deal with what is around you, and how these things that you can use, taken from the existing site or from some reference that can be very far away, but that can be an example to your work, should be used. So we work a lot with case studies. We work a lot with different perspectives of different architects about the same problem. We cross this and we create a toolbox which is somehow different from student to student. So I don't think there's a kind of a given toolbox. I think that the students should build their own based on this idea that I was talking about of trying to learn from. I think learning from, we know that from Venturi, learning from is the best way of creating a solution to. I don't know if I answered to your question.
Yes, thank you. Okay, my next question is for Professor Rui Lobo. The text that you wrote, Fernando Távora as a professor of history of architecture at the University of Coimbra, included in the book In Class with Távora Teaching and Learning, Living Today, with Bárbara Bogoña and João Mendes Ribeiro, highlights the importance of learning architectural history at the start of the architectural degree. Today, how is architectural history taught at the University of Coimbra, and how is it connected to the design studios in the program?
Okay, thank you for that question. Well, at the master course, we have a curriculum of history each year, and this varies. It's tendentially it's chronological, but in fact, in the first year, we have more or less the same curricular unit that the Fernando Távora gave when he was a professor in the first year, and the one that you saw in the book is a kind of introduction. It's a general introduction, so it have first semester is about the origins of architecture and the origins of the cities. So Middle East and Egypt, and then a strong emphasis on Greece and Rome, and then is a second semester more general view about Versailles, about this idea of infinity, and then the modernist approach. So it's a kind of introduction to modernism. Then I'm a professor of the second year, which is general universal. Well, of course, it is Western biased, but it is from the fall of the Roman Empire to the French Revolution. So going through medieval, Renaissance, and Baroque. So I give this course in the second year. The third year is given by Jorge, which is 19th and 20th century architecture, and then I have a module of history of Portuguese architecture. That was also a subject, a curriculum unit that was started by Távora in Oporto, suggested by Távora and started by Alexandre Alves Costa in Oporto. Of course, these disciplines, we all have a practical course associated with the second, the third, and the fourth year, which the students can do research in history, which is interesting. They research by design, for instance. They make models, and so there is a kind of a support kind of course, practical course that goes along, and so this is what happens basically in the master course. In the PhD course, in my seminar, there are some. I give mainly a history of architecture, mainly focusing in Portuguese architecture, and Susana Lobo also gives focus on 20th century Portuguese architecture, and there are some inputs on the other by the other collaborators of the seminar, which cross Portuguese cases of urban design, of analysis of an urban place, cross Portuguese realities and other realities.
Okay, thank you. I think you already answered part of this question, but yes, it's about the design research methodology used in the dissertation, the PhD programs. But you talk about that, but what does this research process involve, and how do students present their projects in this type of methodology?
Well, I have basically fomented this type of work, but I'm currently supervising two PhD theses that use this kind of design research methodology. They are co-supervised by a colleague of us that is a colleague in the computer design, so it's important, also an important input. And one thesis is about the evolution of the Convent of Christ in time, in the long term, if you want. It's a very complex building. So, and we're working in fact, we're working with the direction of the Convent of Christ as a monumental site, and we're treating with equal importance the historic moment as basically the convent as a convent, and then the convent as a monument, and how for him for the last 200 years. And so we're dealing how this very complex building evolves in time, and how 3D technologies and others can help visualizing this shifting and complex reality, shifting in time, for people to understand better the building. Another case is a land plot in Coimbra that near the university, which in fact was the plot of the former university building. We don't know anything about that. Then it was a university college, a new building. This university college had designs for a Baroque university college. Then it was adapted to the academic theater. There was a design by an Italian architect for the academic theater. It became the Faculty of Arts or Letters of Humanities in the beginning of the 20th century. And now it's the General Library, which is a modern, more or less modern building. So it has all these incarnations. And so he's studying how to develop the reconstitution of these several layers of buildings and projects with different levels of information. So how can we do this, and how can we change this reconstitution based on the level of information that we have available?
Thank you.
Well, I can also add that recently our students have been looking also to ethnographic methodologies of understanding their subject. In my case, for example, I have two students. One who is a shopper. He has a shop of creative design, and he's now somehow studying what happened in his neighborhood and how did the city evolve with the presence of this cultural social fabric. So in a way, he's a kind of embedded researcher, because he's also analyzing his own experience as someone included on this urban changing process. And another interesting case is a student that he's a Brazilian student from São Paulo, and he's studying the squatting that São Paulo is known by different squatting processes where people occupy buildings which are empty, and they create a community, and they somehow get the permission through a lot of political struggling to live there and to occupy it and to create not only places for the community, but also housing for people. And he also became a part of this process. So he joined the squatting organization, and now he's studying it from the inside. So I think it's also very interesting that architects can really understand their subjects by creating a condition, as I said, a kind of embedded researcher, as long as they keep their critical distance to the subject. That's always what I keep saying to them. You don't forget you are a PhD student, you are an architect, you're doing a PhD in architecture, so never forget that even if you are embedded in this problem, and you always have, when you start writing, you have to write not only on the first person, no, on his own, it's not an autobiographical experience, it's how you look at other people, how you interview them, what you can take from their experience. But this is also a new kind of methodology that I really try to enhance in my when I try to create the relation between urban culture and urban design. In this case, it's kind of self-urban intervention or self-construction logics. I don't know if you want to talk about your own experience, George, about your PhD students.
Well, I think there is a question a little bit further down the road that on theory and local frameworks and tensions. But I really want to speak on this thesis that I'm supervising by Tamana, which is a researcher from Bangladesh. And it's a very interesting thesis because it goes back to the Portuguese heritage in Bangladesh, because we were there as we were everywhere back in the day, and is going back to the Portuguese presence in Bangladesh, and also to the Islamic presence in Portugal, because they were also everywhere back in the day. So it's a kind of a comparison between, not really a comparison, but following these two case studies,
parallel.
Portuguese in Bangladesh and the Islamic tradition in our country. And it's very interesting because, of course, we are working on this theoretical frame, which is post-colonial completely, going back to Said, etc., but also what is happening right now. So it's very interesting because it's a kind of historical thesis, but is also on what is happening right now. And what is happening in Portugal, as it is happening in everywhere, is a wave of the far right populist movements that are taking over. And it's very interesting and very tragic and very sad, because we're now going to these presidential elections, and now this far right movement put forward an outdoor that says Portugal is not Bangladesh. So I'm looking through her and I'm speaking with her, and we are asking what we should do about this, because it's completely unacceptable that this kind of racist and this kind of xenophobic theories. So that is the case where a theoretical and historical thesis becomes of the right now, of what to do next. So it shows that it's not, the life of a supervisor is not easy.
Then you're going to introduce.
It's a beautiful case.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for taking time out of your afternoon to be here. I'm Shane Stines. I'm a first-year PhD student here at Carleton. And my next two questions, I'm going to sort of, I guess, combine and reframe them. And they're mostly directed to Rui, and I guess the rest of the other, you two can contribute as needed as well. And this is piggybacking off of the response you gave to Emiliano's second question, where you sort of outlined the chronology of architectural history you teach in the course, going from Mesopotamia all the way up to the 20th century. And I guess my first part of this question would be: do you guys still think it's important to focus on Western classical or the Western canon of architecture as a historical precedent in the context of architectural education in the 21st century?
Well, of course, we always try to. I think what is important is to inform that there are other centers of production of architectural culture. It's important that the students have that notion, and I try to give that notion effectively when I give my classes, mainly in the second year. For instance, this idea. Well, you have this idea of pyramids everywhere, if you want. You have in Mesoamerica, in Indonesia. So it's very difficult to give to students that are looking into a mobile. It's very difficult to give a very widespread history. So, of course, I understand your question, but I think what is important is to keep the minds open and to recognize that there are other centers of production of important architectural culture and heritage. And this happens, of course, in the PhD course, for instance, where it happens the other way around. Normally, it's the PhD. We have a lot of international students. We have international students we have had from Iran, from China, from India, from North Africa, from Lebanon. So they all always bring their cultural traditions to the course, to the PhD course. So and in the PhD course, it tends to work the other way around. And we welcome them to bring case studies from their architectural and cultural traditions. This is very important.
I want to add something because, well, I'm the professor of history of architecture from the 19th, 20th, and the 21st century. And the question that you bring forward it's very important. So the way I resolve by the time now this question is by making a disclaimer in my history classes that these are going to be Eurocentric. And then in the theory of architecture, I move for examples, case studies in Africa and China and Latin America. So I kind of divide my time and divide my teachings between, giving a straightforward lessons of history, of architectural history, because I think it's important for them to know the chronology, to know the Art Nouveau and the arts and crafts and Aldo Flows and the Corbusier and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they can organize their point of view. But then in the theory of architectural classes, I really move all over the place. So I try to disorganize completely their mind. So that's my little trick for the moment. Perhaps in the near future, I'm going to combine the two worlds. But for now, it's a way of organizing also my point of view and my mind and my view of the world.
Thank you for that.
Well, in my case, for example, I just take the example of the use of the urban grid, which we tend to think it's eponymous Greek colonial strategy to conquer some site, some territory, which is true. The Greeks used it and the Romans copied it, but the use of the grid is universal. When you look at the other contexts, or other geographical and cultural contexts, the use of the grid is a rational way of distributing not only the population, but also to redistribute the wealth. So in a way, it's quite interesting to tell the students that the grid is not an Eurocentric proposal. It's not a Greek Latin or Greek Roman tool. It was used all over. So I think this tries to decentralize a little bit our tendency of making an Eurocentric speech.
Thank you for that. And I guess my next question, you guys sort of answered it, but as a sort of imagine if the program was to be founded today in the context of post-colonial discourse, like what other histories and cultures would be included in the history of arts and culture course? And I guess you guys sort of alluded to that, but if you guys were to sort of start from scratch today, what would you put in it?
Maybe George, this is one of your topics.
That's a hard question. Can you repeat it?
So if the program was to be founded today and you guys were starting from like not from scratch necessarily, but in the context of modern,
No, as you already understood, our approach is very open to move along year by year and to you know, it's incredible because I have this experience a little bit before the PhD program of starting to speak on feminism and on the presence or on the absence of presence of women in architecture, and that was some 15 years ago, and that was really kind of a new approach, a new idea in our community, in our space. And it's now very banal and very kind of overused. So in a good way, of course, because now it's not a strange notion. Now it's something that we must really think about. And there are a lot of PhD theses, well, 1 or 2 or 3, that were the result of this kind of preoccupations. And that, of course, makes me very, very happy to know. But the thing is, we're really, just to simplify, I think that the university is a place of a really kind of a slow motion and inertia, because it has to be, you know, has to be an institution and has to be slow to dwell on things. But at the same time, it must move very fast, because we must be at the front of what is happening right now. So we are trying to connect these two very opposite directions of moving slow and moving very fast. So this is why I'm doing history as a very slow motion kind of picture, and theory as really like some cartoon trying to be speeder as I can.
Well, it's interesting, for example, with our Brazilian students, when they come, they normally start by saying, I would like to research on European thematic, on an European architect. And we always say, no, you should look up to Brazil, and not to the local heroes, for example, because a lot of theses have been done by around Niemeyer or Lúcio Costa or even Paulo Mendes da Rocha. You should start looking at other realities, and mostly the communities that are self-organized there, for example, and try to understand how these other urban communities are also part of the urban history of Brazil. No, the favela, for example, is more Brazilian than the formal city, which was imported by the colonial period or the post-colonial period in the modern moment. So I think it's also interesting to make the students look at their own countries in a kind of post-colonial perspective, and understand that some of what they consider to be not urban or not interesting enough might be at the DNA of their own culture. So, and of course, this is getting very interesting results from my perspective.
Thank you for that. My next question is about the Bologna process, which Rui mentioned very, very briefly early in the conversation. And I would like to know what changes to the program and curriculum were precipitated by the Bologna process, which, as we understand it, served to unify education in Europe.
Well, in the PhD course, it was simple. It was in fact, it was the passage of this 3-semester curricular to 2-semester, which is much more practical. And of course, there was a lot of investment also by, so there were a lot of curricular units. This was simplified, and we make this kind of synthesis that are the 3 seminars and then the methodologies and the thesis project. So this was a direct consequence of the Bologna process in the PhD course. And in the master course is what we had. I made the course when I was a student. It took me 6 years. So the normal was 5 years in the semester, but no one did the final proof in 1 semester. So it took eventually 6 years. And now we're trying to focus on the students, the master students finishing the course in 5 years. And for that, we have Nuno can talk about, because he's a design studio professor. And we have the second cycle, so the fourth and the fifth year, they have the design studio. And this is something I forgot to talk about when in the previous question, is that this design studio, they keep the same professor 2 years, and they're focusing on trying to finish the master thesis in the end of the fifth year. And so, for instance, the history of Portuguese architecture works in close connection, because normally the case studies are in Portugal, and I normally give the groups teams to met in the practical work, so that they could help their own master thesis with historical architectural information. I even helped, for instance, a case study that one of our colleagues decided to make a work in Naples. And there were, of course, there is work by Alvercisa and Sotomora in Naples. So I suggested the group to make a work on the works of the Alvercisa and Sotomora in Naples. So they make this is history of Portuguese architecture. So normally this history of Portuguese architecture, the practical course, works around the design studio to help them create material for their master thesis.
Well, I have to say that the courses of architecture, they try to resist to the Bologna partition. And in our case, we have what we call an integrated master, which means that the student from the first year is already in a master course. Of course, if he doesn't accomplish the whole 5 years, he only would get a bachelor degree. But since the first year, he is already a master student, which gives him, somehow empowers him to think that he will accomplish different tasks through the 5 years. And there's no deep difference, let's say, in the level of information that he gets from the first to the fifth year.
There's a continuity.
There's a continuity. So there's a kind of vertical relationship between the 5 years. And as Rui was saying, we tried also to create an horizontal relationship between the design courses and the theoretical disciplines, so that the student can go through his path, learning always how to deal with what he left and what is coming next year, but also trying to relate the complementary knowledge that he receives from the theoretical discipline. Of course, this can have a disadvantage, which is the student staying 5 years in the same school.
But they can change. They can change school in the third year. They can apply to another course to do the fourth and fifth year in another school.
Yeah, they can. But normally what happens is that we receive students from abroad, and only by Erasmus programs they go abroad to finish their or to complete their training. So in a way, it's good that we have resisted to the Bologna partition, but in another way, that also can create the idea that this is a kind of monolithic course, which somehow I think we should also.
That is the same thing in all schools in Portugal. That is not a Coimbra thing.
Yeah, it's not a Coimbra thing. All the architectural courses try to resist to this partition between first.
It's architecture and medicine. So we're the two areas that still have integrated masters in Portugal, is architecture and medicine. That were courses that, interestingly enough, had 6-year courses before the Bologna process.
Well, it's the idea that it takes too long to create a doctor, a medicine doctor, and it also it takes too long to make a good architect.
Also, the idea that we are as important as doctors, which is not true.
Thank you for
that. Good afternoon. My name is Ashleigh Abraham. I am a second-year PhD student, and I know all of you have touched on some of my questions that I'll be kind of asking now, but I'd love for you to elaborate if you can. My question is for Professor Jorge Figueira. I wonder how the program addresses the tensions between theoretical frameworks and the specificity of local cultures within the stream of cultural studies and architecture.
Well, I was thank you. I was answering to your question back in a while, but I can go back to what I was saying, and to me, I think it's very interesting and very architectural when we are dealing with theory, and I hand theory of the seminal books on post-colonialism or modernism or whatever, and we're dealing with a situation that is of right now, that it's a local question that ignites us to do something. So I think as architects, we are trained to do a little bit of that, to have the eye theory and to draw the solution right away to move forward. So I think that we are, that is a good thing of being an architect. The idea of bringing big theories to local tensions and to local situations. I think if you can conclude something, a PhD thesis is a little bit like that. It's going through the waves of theories and ideas in history and try to resolve this problem of writing this 200 pages or of something. So it's to solve a problem. So I think we are not really, as I'm always saying, that we are not pure intellectuals. We architects are not pure. If there is such thing, of course there is not such thing, but we are very impure intellectuals, because we have to solve problems, not just diagnose them. So that is a good thing for us architects, to be able to deal with the theory and to look to the solve problem question. That's the way I try to speak with my students and try to support them.
Thank you very much. My second question was, how does the school support students to reconcile the demands of contemporary architecture research within the embodied histories of local Portuguese history and environments? And to what extent does this reciprocity translate to the students' doctoral works?
Well, I didn't mention, we have an agreement with the Canadian Centre for Architecture. And as you might know, Bruno knows that. That's why he went to Canada. Álvaro Sisa's archive, for example, is in Canada, at the CCA. Part of it. Well, most of it. So in a way, we try to give scholarships for students to travel. There's one TCA scholarship that we are affiliated with, and every year we give this scholarship for the student to go and study at the CCA. Not only on CISA, they can choose other archives of the collection. So that's one way of trying to give them the chance to go abroad and see other realities. But in terms of the local archives, fortunately, Portugal is now, it has been recognized that it's quite important to keep the archives of different architects who are really meaningful for our recent history. And that is being done at least by 3 institutions.
Yes, there's an archive fever right now.
Yeah, there's a kind of archive fever. And this is also very good because, for example, Casa da Arquitetura in Matosinhos is also giving a scholarship for the students to go and study on their archive. And our state scholarship for PhD research also enhances the importance of dealing and researching about existing archives. So I think in a way Portugal has been changing for the last, let's say, 5 to 6 years. These archives are now available, and I think we are starting to learn a little bit more about ourselves, because before these archives were not organized. Architects would give interviews and supply their own material. But when we look at all their work through the archive, we understand it better. And so I'm glad that we are now witnessing this change, and that our PhD creates the chance for the students to go and research.
We even have, we're constituting an archive at our school also, with material from Coimbra architects, from modernist period and from more recent periods. So we have about like 8 or 9 names. Jorge Figueira also contributed some of his work as an architect to this archive. But we have, but there is an important one also. The Faculty of Architecture in Lisbon has about 70 names right now. They're constituting this. And then you have Casa de Arquitetura in Porto. The Porto School and the Fundação Marcos da Silva also have an important set of archives. So we're starting to have a big network, mainly concerning the 20th century and the late 19th century. We also have municipal archives, like the Lisbon Municipal Archive is also important for some architects, or the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation also has half a dozen of very important archives. So we start personal archives. So we start having this network that allows, so there's a lot of work to be done.
Thank you. And my last question would be for Professor Nuno Grande. I would like to ask how the urban culture and design stream facilitates the development of interdisciplinary research that explores cultural boundaries, and what strategies are in place to assist doctoral work to be responsive and or participatory in today's multicultural cities?
Well, as I have explained, our methods of research include a lot of different fields, from ethnography to sociology. We are also part of the Social Studies Center, we three. So we push the students to go and read and interview people from other fields that can contribute to their research on architecture. But we can never forget they're researching on their PhDs in architecture. So we always say, okay, you're not an ethnographer, you're not a sociologist, you're not an historian, even that, but you can use all of these disciplines to enrich your architectural approach. I think all good architects have done this through their lives. So I think all architectural researchers should also do this through their lives, to learn from, as I said, other disciplines, but never forget they are doing a PhD in architecture. So the participatorial process is also part of this. As I said, a lot of students, they go to the site, to the research site or the research area, and they try to understand the social fabric of this area. They interview people. I call them embedded researchers. I think this idea is quite interesting. But when they come back to the loneliness of their computer and their laptop, they have to understand that what they are writing about is architecture. Architecture of course, in a broader sense. I don't know if I answered to your question, but
yes, I would perhaps like to add that, of course, you can also have the figure of the co-supervisor, which can be an expert, a professor, an academic of other field. So you don't. So of course you're obliged to have a supervisor from the school, and then you can have up to two co-supervisors of other faculties in the same university or of other universities. So you have this flexibility, and we instigate them to do this, to convoke, to ask for other, if it's important, an important field of research, it's very important to have an expert in this area.
Thank you very much.
Well, I didn't mention, we also have a magazine, what we call, it's called Joelho, Knee. And the knee is a lot about this idea of something that articulates things. And some of our PhD students have already published in this magazine before they defended their PhD thesis. So it's quite good to have also every year a call for students to write about what they're doing and to publish in our magazine and of course in other magazines and to apply to other conferences. So I think it's quite important for us to maintain this idea that architecture cannot be alone as a discipline, as a realm of studies, and it has to create a constant dialogue with all what surrounds it.
Yes, and perhaps I could add in answering the previous question you made, Ashleigh, concerning the support that we have in the methodologies unit. The students they are helped making a kind of article format for a development of a subject so that they can submit an article in a magazine. So they are trained to do that. And they also trained to submit an appeal for a fellowship, which normally happens in March. So normally they arrive without a fellowship at the first year.
A scholarship.
And so it's a scholarship. Yes, sorry. And so they are trained also to submit an appeal for a scholarship, which happens in March, which is helpful because normally the scholarships are given 3 to 4 years. So that is why some students take more time because they have a scholarship. So if they start the first year and they receive a scholarship in the start of the second year, they'll have like 5 years to do the PhD. So which is okay.
Thank you. That's really great.
Thank you indeed for all the insights. And we're coming to the last few questions, and we just wanted to focus on the doctoral researchers and the degrees of autonomies in how they conduct this research. And of course, there is in every school, we have to balance, the expertise of the supervisors, the expertise of the school, and the questions that the researcher brings to the school. So we wanted to ask if you could go into a little bit more detail in terms of the role of the supervisor in balancing this act, informing researchers that are ultimately independent researchers. So how do they get to the definition of the topic, the methodologies that they choose for the research, and whether there are also limits in a sense to, the topics that can be covered or research areas. We didn't talk at all about funding, but I wonder if funding has any kind of impact on that in terms of research assistantships or what the labs can do, and anything you want to comment on in that area.
Well, it's true that, as I said, we ask the students to apply to the course without a prefab or a closed idea of what they want to research about. So it's an ongoing construction during the first and the second semester. In the first semester, normally they don't have a supervisor chosen yet. They are looking in the school for the person that they think because they know what we research about. Every one of us, they get in contact with our bibliography and our research projects, and then they come and ask us, and we normally say, okay, let's build it together until the end of the second semester. But he only gets to be a supervisor when the thesis project is defended publicly. So the supervisor, until then, it's a tutor. It's a research tutor. And then after the defense, it becomes the official supervisor. So I think it's a mutual construction of the research theme. And as Rui said, some of this research comes from the paper we asked them to develop on the first semester or in the second semester. They start developing a paper on a theme, and they suddenly understand that this theme that has something to do with their own biography, but it can also have to do with what the tutor suggests, can become a research theme for a PhD thesis. And so I think it's, as I said, an ongoing construction.
So I may add something to say that. To answer your question, it's really a very case-by-case scenario and a very organic process. I would say. But the thing is, we don't want to plant an idea on them. We want them to be attached to what they are creating and what they are thinking. So it's organic process in the sense that they have an impression of an idea, and they know our curricula and they know our sensibilities. So it's a kind of flirting academic idea that may bring us together. But the thing is, we don't really use this notion of saying, I want you to study Mies van der Rohe, Barcelona Pavilion. That doesn't really exist in our program. We want the students to feel like they're creating something that has origin in their own biography or experience or whatever. That is very important to us.
Yes, and I would add that, of course, there is a very important contribution by other main three colleagues, that Gonçalo, who has the methodologies course, and then the second semester, José António Bandeirinha and Tiago Castella, who are very instrumental in helping also the students to find their teams and their supervisors amongst the faculty, the teaching staff of the faculty. I would say that in terms of limitations that Federica pointed out, I think the limit it's an architectural thesis. That's the limit.
And what also the financial support? Yeah, that's a big issue, because normally students can afford to pay for the first curricular year, but they aiming to get scholarship for the rest of the 3 years of research they have to do. But when they don't get it, normally they give up. Well, they get the certificate of the first curricular year, they get a post-graduation certificate, but they don't get, they cannot manage to fund themselves their research.
Sometimes they take like 8 or 10 years in that situation.
We had students that are from the first course presenting now. So we understand them, of course, because they have to get a job to pay for their studies. So it's quite difficult without a scholarship. It's quite difficult to do it in 4 years. Quite difficult.
Thank you. Yes, Leah, you have the next. Yes.
You had touched on the fact that there's international students that are coming, and from outside of Portugal. And I just wanted to ask a question. How do these students that are coming from outside of Portugal inform the regionalist styles? And how might they export those back to their home country?
When you say regional, you say about their traditions in architecture or their local production. Yeah.
I was sort of more specifically looking at an example of the Porto School and like regionalist styles that are coming from Portugal. And so how they might inform, as students are coming in and like learning together from other countries, how do they inform each other, both in Portugal and also in their home country? How do they export it back? I mean, maybe a case study around Brazil might be like a PhD student.
First of all, let me say something about the word regional, because as you might know, there's an epithet by Kenneth Frampton about Portuguese architecture, where he somehow inscribed Portuguese architecture in what he called then critical regionalism. And we never felt ourselves as regionalists. I think, for Kenneth Frampton it was important because he was in a kind of struggle with postmodernism and classicism, or the postmodern classicism, and he used the Porto School as an example of critical regionalism. But I don't think it was the right epithet, because I don't think, for example, Cisa never considered himself as a regionalist. When you look at his architecture, he tries to understand every place where he designs. He tries to understand the local architecture, without bringing any kind of regional Portuguese folkloric perspective of what to do. So in a way,
it's original in that sense.
Yeah, I think it was this word. I think it's a nice word.
We're not listening. No.
I'm saying,
yes.
That I think it's more adaptive than regionalist. He tries to understand, he tries to learn from the places where he designs his buildings, and he tries to adapt them to the local context. So if you want, he's an universalist or a universal regionalist in a way, or a regional universalist. So in a way, I don't think regional, it's a word that you can really attach to Portuguese architecture. Even, of course, if we did, in the late 50s, we tried to understand what was this thing about being Portuguese and the Portuguese regional architecture. But we did this because we wanted to understand how to be in the world, not because we wanted to defend our own world or our own realm, or as a kind of defensive position. So in a way, what we try to teach our students is, of course, they have to know where they depart from, and they can never forget where they depart from. But of course, they have to mix and cross all the universal cultures and geographies they learn and they pass through. And I think that's the ultimate thing of being an architect, is to cross cultures and cross learnings. That's it. So I don't know if I really understood your question, but the word regional for us is always a little bit tricky because of this moment when we were considered critical regionalists. We like to be critical, maybe not regionalists.
Well, but I think there's a nice, interesting issue about this is that when this generation of architects that were working in the 1950s, like Fernando Tavra, when they were stopped being allowed to make modernist architecture, that there was a time when it was allowed in the 30s and so on, they resorted to traditional architecture, and they made the inquiry, the famous inquiry to popular architecture, to show that and not use it as a pastiche of images, to use as a collage, but to show that in fact the regionalist or the local architecture, traditional, was the most functionalist because it made the most out of the less resources. And so this was a functionalist approach. They wanted to do functionalist architecture, but they looked at vernacular architecture to show how it was functionalist.
Thank you.
But George, you have a lot to say about this, I guess.
Enough has been said about that. Yeah. No, the thing is, the crossover I think that we're trying to make is mainly with Brazil. We have a lot of Brazilian students that are working on Portuguese themes or are working on Brazilian themes. For us, it's almost indifferent if they study Portuguese or study Brazilian cases. So it's the case studies that are interesting to us. So we are ready and open. Also, we have, as I was saying, Bangladesh students, Chinese students, and we aim to grow wider and expand our horizons also in that sense, which makes a big problem, which is the language that we speak, because we are always going through Portuguese and English, and if we speak Portuguese, the Iranian and Chinese people don't understand us, and if we speak English, sometimes Brazilian people cannot understand us, and even the Iranian students not really understand us. So the language is really a problem, in a good and also in a bad way, because to do a PhD, you have to be very proficient in the language that you choose to speak. So we're trying to navigate around these issues.
But of course, you can write the thesis in English, of course.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I think in other languages, I think you can write it in French or in Spanish. I'm not sure, but in English, at least you're allowed to.
It's not a question of being allowed. It's a question of
no, but it's also allowed.
the question, the language question.
Yes, I know.
The Portuguese is a very well-spoken language around the world, mainly because of Angola and Mozambique and Brazil, of course. So we have this difficulty. If we somehow gatekeep our language, or we abandon everything and go to English.
Thank you for that. I have one final question, which you guys have already answered in part. The question is about the autonomy of students, and you sort of alluded to them having a lot of autonomy, like they pick their supervisors, and George mentioned that you want them to sort of feel that the research is more internally driven than externally driven. So I guess the questions I would ask are, is autonomy necessary to the direction and conduct of research? And what is your advice for PhD students as they approach this question in their own programs around the world?
No, very rapidly, for me, the autonomy is very, very important, but also there's a protocol. There's an academic side of the PhD thesis, which means the student cannot do poetry or essays as a PhD. So autonomy, yes. Autobiographical, perhaps, yes. But then there's a very strong academic protocol, which means papers and footnotes and bibliography and all the language that in a PhD you have to show that you know something, even if everybody knows that you know that something. So it's a kind of a choreography that goes beyond the autonomy. You can have all the autonomy. You can also think that you invented that idea, and nobody invents ideas. They're all in the ether. But the price to pay to this autonomy is to be inside the academic protocol. That is very clear for us.
Thank you very much. And really, thank you for the opportunity to get this, triangulated view on the PhD program and the history, your approaches and philosophies. So, and for your generosity in taking on the full agenda of questions.
Thank you.
No, thanks for
having
us. It was a pleasure.
It's also very good for us. It's also very good for us. Let me just say, it's also very good for us because we are listening to ourselves, and we are somehow enriching our way of explaining it.
Well, I'm fed up of listening to myself, but
well, thank you very much. I've been quiet for the last hour and a half or so, but I've been very much enjoying your exchange to my colleagues, and thank you very much. It's really nice for me to hear your voices and your thoughts about your own program, something that I feel that I personally also belong to. So
yes,
thank you very much.
Yes,
you will be in touch. Thank you very much.
And delighted
thank
to
you,
meet
Federica,
you
all the nice people there.
Okay, thank you for everything. Bye.